We are talking about commas today, and we're going to start out with participle phrases. Now, so many people get confused about our participle phrases and what they are. They're really our adjective phrases. We can call them adjective phrases, we can call them participle phrases, but it's important to call them and understand participle phrases with that. Participle phrases, they are participles plus all the words that go with it. What are participles? Ends with an ing, unless it's a unit syllable, or with an ed. If you're adding on your suffix ing, or you're adding on your suffix ed, you know you have a participle. And remember, we have our past participles that fit in the irregular section also. And those would be sitting in the participle phrases. Now, participle phrases typically are ings. Eds are so much harder to actually write than ing participle phrases, but we obviously have them. Now, look at this sentence, boys. Pedaling through the trees for the first time on her bike this season, that was me a couple weeks ago, Lisa giggled with happiness. Now, what's our participle phrase right there?
From the first word to season.
The comma. Exactly. This entire phrase right here is a participle phrase. So now look, how many prepositional phrases do we have in that participle phrase? Three. We have through the trees, for the first time, on her bike. And then we have another phrase, this season, right? So this is an entire participle phrase, and when you are beginning a participle phrase, you need to have a comma. Now, it's important to know that we have different words for different things. Oftentimes we have our basic words, what we call certain sentences, and then we add on. And that's why we haven't really talked about participle phrases very much. We have a little bit, but this is just a little bit more advanced for you guys to understand. Now remember, if it starts with your ing, look, no verbs, no verbs, no verbs. Oh, look, now you have the subject or the noun, which is the noun and the subject. Lisa, which is the noun, which is the subject, right there, sits close to the end of the phrase. See how? It's either at the very end of this phrase or it's close to the end. Now, the only thing that can separate the participle phrase from the subject is an adjective or adjectives. So you can have other adjectives describing Lisa right here in between them, but that's the only thing you can have between this entire phrase and Lisa, the subject or the noun. You have the comma, then your subject or the noun. If you have a verb in here, you are not having a participle phrase. So you can say, pedaling is hard to do. Pedaling is fun to do. What would be pedaling?
Subject.
Your gerund. That exactly, Daniel. It is your subject, it's your noun, it's your gerund, and it is not a participle phrase. So if you're having anything like a verb in through here, then you know you're not sitting in the participle phrase section. The entire participle phrase is acting as the adjective describing the subject, Lisa. This entire thing is acting as the adjective describing this noun, this subject right here. Now here's another sentence. Parked in the dark parking lot of the old cafe. Now look at this. This right here with this apostrophe right above the E, this is a French word. And a lot of people, I've seen words that do not have this, but it would be wrong. But here in America, sometimes we spell it without. But if you see this mark right above the E, then you know it's going to say A, and it's French. And this says cafe. So that's what that does right there. Now let's start this sentence over. Parked in the dark parking lot of the old cafe, Richard hunkered down in his seat so the suspect could not see him. What is our participle phrase in here? Good. So parked in the dark parking lot of the old cafe. This entire phrase right here is our participle phrase. Now, how many prepositional phrases do we have in this participle phrase?
2.
We have 2. We have 2. Parked in the dark parking lot of the old cafe. See, we have 2 right there, but it all goes together. You put the comma, look, your participle is starting it, and then you put the comma right before the noun, the subject of your independent clause. This is an independent clause right here. Richard hunkered down in his seat. That's actually, and this is an independent clause. The suspect could not see him. They're both independent clauses. Right here, the entire participle phrase is acting as the adjective describing the subject, Richard. This entire participle phrase, what is this? An adjective phrase, but we're calling it a participle because it starts out with a participle. It's describing this subject, this noun. The entire participle phrase is acting as the adjective describing the subject, Richard. A participle, it's an adjective. It's formed from the participle. You have your ing, your ed, or your irregular, but your participle is also your present participle is your ings. Now, if you are going to have them act as a verb, your present participle, no matter what, your ings are called your present participle. Whether it's an adjective or if you're having them work as a progressive tense. But your present participles are your ings. If you're going to use them as a verb, it's going to put you in the progressive tense with your auxiliary verbs. If we have our present participles, no matter what, present participles are our ings. They sit us in the progressive tense, right? But you have to use your auxiliary verb to do that. Now, right here, or do we use auxiliary verbs if we're using them as adjectives? No, we do not. Look, do you see an auxiliary verb stuck to this? Do we see am, are, or is pedaling through? See, then that puts it as a question. So your auxiliary verbs, if you're going to use them as an adjective, you do not use your auxiliary verb. You only use them if you want to use them as a verb. Now, your past participles, you're putting it in the perfect tense. You're going to use them as your auxiliary verb. Now, also, if you have a past participle with your ed, these ones can be a little bit more confusing because if they're just sitting in the past, if it's sitting in the simple past, we don't have to use an auxiliary verb. But if you want it in the perfect tense, you're using an auxiliary verb, okay? But do we use the auxiliary verbs if we're using it as an adjective?
No.
No. So it's either our eds or our irregulars that put us in the participle. The participle is different than the past tense. Now look at this. Constructing participles are easy. What is this? What do you think that ing is? Constructing participles are easy. What is that?
An adjective.
That's an adjective. Is it a participle phrase?
No.
This is a participle acting as an adjective, but it is not a participle phrase. Why is it not a participle phrase, Paul? Because it doesn't have lots of other words attached to it. This is just, what's that?
It has a verb in it.
Yeah, right here, it has a verb. So this is your subject, and this is your linking verb. Subject, linking verb. This right here is describing participles, constructing participles. But it's just your adjective. It's your present participle. This is a participle. It's your present participle acting as an adjective describing the word participles. So, constructing participles, it's easy. Just use your auxiliary verbs and no auxiliary verb if the participle is describing a noun or a pronoun. This could be a little bit trickier. Just use your auxiliary verbs. Well, it's unless you are in the simple past tense. So constructing participles, Paul, you can notice this. Constructing participles are easy. Just use your auxiliary verbs. But unless you're in the simple past tense, then that can be a little bit trickier. EDs are trickier, but INGs are the ones that are mostly used for our participle phrases. But no auxiliary verbs if the participle is describing a noun or a pronoun. Is this entire participle phrase describing a noun or a pronoun? It is. Is this participle describing this noun?
Yeah.
It is. Is this entire participle phrase describing that noun? It is. So we know that this is an adjective. Boom. It's an adjective. Parents interested in their children's education create children that want a better education for themselves. What is our participle phrase in this sentence? This one's trickier because we're not starting it.
And there's no comma.
And there's no commas, exactly. Look at this. Interested in their children's education. Look, this is your participle phrase right here. Interested to education. So this is where it can get confusing. And we don't have commas to set it off. It doesn't need commas. Parents interested. This looks like the past tense ED, the simple past tense. And it looks like parents interested in their children's education. But look, this parent actually goes to this verb. So you have to be really careful to understand. It looks like these two go together, but this right here is actually the adjective. This participle phrase is an adjective phrase describing parents. Parents that are interested in their children's education. Do you see that? See how that can be really confusing? You're like, what is that? Well, there's the verb too. What is that? So parents create children that want a better education for themselves. Parents interested in their children's education create children that want a better education for themselves. That is a participle phrase that's describing parents. And see how it's your past tense. See, that's why it can be really confusing. Now, if we had an auxiliary verb right here, it wouldn't be confusing because you know that that would be part of your verb, right? Does that make sense, Paul? Now, look at this. The comma after the participle phrase, if you begin the sentence with the participle phrase, put your comma after the participle phrase. If it begins with the participle, put your comma after the participle phrase if it begins it, not if it's in the middle of the sentence like that. So now listen to this, boys. This goes to you. One should dedicate their youth to learning so that you can take care of yourself and your dependents when you are older. So I know that's hard in some areas to really do that because you have to work. But once you have children and once you have older people to take care of, you have a much harder time to dedicate yourself to your learning. I'm talking about men and women need to dedicate themselves to learning so you can take care of your children. Now, women, it has actually been proven that if a woman is educated, guess who gets educated? The child gets educated because she's the one that's in the home most of the time and the man is out making the money. That's not the case for every case, obviously, but if a woman is educated, their child will be more educated. Now we're going to talk about a noun of a direct address. So, noun of a direct address, these take commas. It helps your reader understand why. Why do we need to know what a noun of a direct address is because it helps us understand our commas. Paul, comma, I'm addressing Paul. I think you're not listening. So I'm addressing him, so it takes the comma. Now, that's at the beginning of a sentence. Now look what happens if you're in the middle of a sentence, Polly. I know, sweetheart, that you are working hard. So you could switch it. I know, Paul, that you are working hard. I know, Daniel, that you are working hard. But if it's in the middle of a sentence, this is where your commas go. If it's at the beginning, you say the noun with the direct address. See how we're addressing Paul. See how we're addressing sweetheart. I know, sweetheart. What is your schedule for the day, comma, Richard? See how I'm directly addressing Richard. Thank you, comma, Dad, comma, for picking up dinner. This is what you do if it's in the middle of a sentence. At the beginning, Richie, you are my best friend. Dad actually said that to me a couple days ago. Richie, you are my best friend. I said it back. Now, remember, comma after your noun with the direct address. Noun, and you're directly addressing them. Noun, you're directly addressing them, right? Paul, you are my best friend. Daniel, you are my best friend. We're shifting gears and we're talking about interjections. Now remember, ject means to throw and inter means between. So you're throwing it into sentences, in between words. And a lot of interjections, they really just don't follow rules. And I mean, you do have punctuation that you need to kind of figure out, but they really just don't follow rules. They can be single words or they can be phrases, and you use commas and exclamation points with them. There's not a lot of rules what words you can use. You can just put them in the sentences, especially if you're using your own dialogue, your own speaking. You can just, there's not a lot of rules there. Let's look at this sentence. Phew! I am so glad the ACT test is over. This was B. Daniel. He was so glad. Now we're going to talk about quotes. A direct quote from Daniel. So we are putting them in quotes. Now look, phew, there's our comma. And then we are starting this with a capital letter because it's the word I. But if not, you would just do lower caps because this is a comma right here. But you could also say phew. If you want to say it louder and more with more pizzazz, you could do an exclamation point. Now look at this. See right here? Phew. And then with the comma, it would be lower caps, but if we use an exclamation point, you need to capitalize the next word. But look where the period is right here. Is it inside the quotes?
Inside the quotes.
It's inside the quotes. Now, when you're doing a direct quote like that, it needs to be inside the quotes. Make sure that you are doing your direct quotes correctly. The direct quotes, they are the exact words of somebody. Also, you put quotes around titles. Talk about the titles, they go in quotes. Songs, articles, poems, short stories, essays, chapters in books, and episodes in shows. Now remember, we don't quote around the titles of books. The quotes go around small pieces of work. And if you think about chapters in book, that's the small pieces, it's the subplots in the main, the plot of the whole book. So that's where you put the quotes. They go in small pieces of work. Daniel yelled, comma, phew, exclamation point, the test is over. But where's our quotes go? Right here with his exact wording. Now this right here is the narration, and this is the dialogue or the monologue. If he's saying it all by himself, it would be monologue. If it's a dialogue, it's talking to more than one person, okay? Now look, inside the quotes, when you're doing something like this. But see how we have the exclamation point? But if we did a comma, then this would be lower caps. Like here, comma, lower, exclamation point, you're gonna capitalize that. Now this is called right here, this is American. This is the American way. How do we do this? British is a little bit different, and if you are from that area, you need to study how they do it. Phew, quotes, quotes, exclamation point. Look, this is right inside of the actual speaking, what they are actually saying. Quotes, quotes, it goes in here. But look, there's narration, Daniel cheered, comma, and then, look, it starts with a capital. The exact sentence. See the comma, but the capital right here. Because this is the exact sentence, what he's saying. The test is over. Look, it's inside the quotation marks. Phew, exclamation point. Look, the quotes are right there. This is exactly what he's saying. The test is over with your comma and your quotes at the end. Cheered Daniel, but look, lower caps right here. And then we just have a period at the end. So this can be really confusing. So you need to study this. If the quote is not clear, it is important to add words to clear up any confusion. So if you're actually quoting somebody and it's not clear exactly what they said, just add a couple words. Make sure that you can convey what they are trying to say and clear it up. Now here is another use of quotes, and we're talking about a song here. This is how you would quote titles. I love to listen to the song I Can Only Imagine, which I love that song. Now look how we put this now. The period is on the outside. See how when we're talking about narration and dialogue, the period is on the inside. But when we're talking about we're just quoting one of these titles, let's put it on the outside. It periods this entire thing. If that thing at the end is the exact quotes and you're ending that, then the period goes in the quotes. But if you're actually ending just your sentence, then a period goes on the outside. And see how important this is if you're understanding this? I love to listen to the song I Can Only Imagine. Look, there's no comma here. You're just stating the fact, and then your period goes on the outside. You need to remember that you do not put commas in there, and this period goes right here. Let's look what happens when we have single words and we're using irony, or we're just wanting to highlight a word because a lot of times when people are speaking, you see them do the quote symbol. Let's see what we would do in this sense if we're going to use single words. I would like to say the ribs were perfect. I wish they were perfect, but they were a little too salty. So see, you're not putting commas on anything, you're just putting quotes around it. That's how you do when you want to use just a single word. Here's another way you could do that. The words affect and affect are so confusing. See how I just put quotation marks in here? There's no commas, nothing. Just add your quotes in. When you want to highlight a certain word, highlight words or certain words, you can just do it like that. No commas or anything. Mom said, clean the kitchen. Mom said, clean the kitchen. Which one's correct? Neil and Paul say the top one, which is correct. But this is really interesting, and I haven't studied this as much, but this is American English, and this is British English. This I think is super interesting. So if you are in the UK or in those areas, you need to study how to actually put your periods properly, because this is how we do it in America. This is how they do something like this in the British area. So just study. We're talking about dialogue, so I'm going to call it dialogue. If you're talking and speaking all by yourself, it's considered monologue. Now this is considered narration right here. Somebody is narrating this. Clean the kitchen, said Daniel. See, they're narrating what this is. If you're reading a book, this is the narrator. Who's the narrator?
The person.
Yeah, the person who is actually speaking, the narrator. He's narrating this. So if you're actually in a play, they don't say, said Daniel. They're narrating. Okay.
Leave it out.
But this is how you would do sentences like this. Quotation marks around clean the kitchen. And then we have a comma right here. But look, lowercase right here. What's the next one? Now, this is the exact wording, clean the kitchen. Did you like your class? Question mark. The exact wording is going in the quotation marks. Look where the question mark is right here. It's inside the quotation marks. But look, the narration right here is lower caps. This is lower caps right here. I loved debate today, exclamation point. It's still lower caps. Quotation marks around exactly what they said. Quotation marks around here, it's our last day of class, exclamation point, yelled Paul, but We're just lower capsing it because this is what you do with the narration right here. This is when it's okay to do contractions. And I wanted to talk about contractions in the last one, I forgot. Look, it is. But we speak in contractions in the English language all of the time. When I was working with the lady that I'm helping her with her English, she asked me about contractions, and I could not believe, really, truly, we speak in contractions all of the time. So this is the time when you use contractions. You do not use them in papers, formal writing, do not use it in contractions, but you do here. Remember, British usage can be different, so be careful with that. If we're thinking about quotes and we have quotes inside of a quote, this is really interesting, and we don't do this all the time, but it's important that you understand it. So then we have a quote, we have the quote symbol, and then let's say we have a quote inside a quote and we're ending it with the quote. So we have quotes, and then we have three symbols, the quotes at the end. Now, if we're doing it just on the inside and we're not ending the quote in a quote, we would do the quote like this. Okay, so when you have a quote within a quote and you're quoting somebody, then you're really involving three people. Titles can be in quotes, not all, so look it up. So we kind of went through the titles. It's really smaller pieces of work, so be really careful which titles that you put in your quotes. Use your quotes to give clear meaning. See, this is giving clear meaning. You're really highlighting that. When we're talking about effect and effect, you're trying to clear the meaning up. Sometimes we use quotes, even though they are not the exact words with what they're saying, but they're the main words that they're saying. Sometimes we do that. Now also, let's talk about capitalization. Lisa shouted, comma. Now, this is narration, right? Is this narration, Paul? This is narration. And then look what's next. Capitalize. This is what's in quotes. The period's inside. I love spring. Lisa shouted, comma, I love spring. So put those in quotes, exactly what they say. This is the narration. This is the dialogue. We all know that the I's have to be capitalized no matter what. It's capitalized in the English language. So that one is not confusing. But what about that? When you come from here, is it capitalized? It is. It's because it's the main, it's really, this is the subject and the verb. It's the main statement that's coming off of this narration right here. This is in the middle of a sentence. See how this is in the middle of a sentence when you do that? You don't have to worry about it if you begin the sentence, but if it's in the middle of a sentence, it can be confusing. So be careful with that. Check it to see if you're right. If you're confused, go back and check it. Now also, let's talk about block quotes. Block quotes are different. We do not put them in the typical quotes. Block quotes are 4 lines or more. Also, some people don't always agree exactly how you want to do the block quote. So check with your teacher, your job. Just make sure you know what they want when you're putting it in the block quotes. Let's move into parenthetical expressions. So parenthetical expressions, they're just extra information. You're putting words together that should not be together. It just doesn't run smooth. That's what a parenthetical expression is. So if it causes confusion without the comma, make sure you're putting in a comma. If you feel it really needs a comma, put it in. If there is confusion at all without the comma, put the comma in. You put your commas in with rules, but if you know that there is absolute confusion, put a comma in. For instance, this is a parenthetical expression, and this is one that so many people say. Mother's Day, in my opinion, was amazing. See how we block it off. Look, it's a non-essential. Non-essentials, if it's in the middle of a sentence, you block off the front and you put it behind it. So you can take this out completely. Now, what if it's in the front? What if it's in the front, Paul? What do you do with it? If I say, in my opinion, Mother's Day was amazing. Yeah, you capitalize the I and you put the comma after it. What if it's at the end? Mother's Day was amazing, in my opinion. What are you going to do? Comma after amazing, and then you just put a period at the end of "in my opinion." Now, let's say we want quotation marks around this. Let's say that this is the dialogue. This isn't just a sentence, I'm speaking it. So we would quote right here, right? Where else would our quotes be?
After the period.
Right there, and then we would put a comma and we would say "said mom." Whoops, let's capitalize mom. Because this is me, talking about me, right? That's how you would do that if you want to add that. Oh, also with parenthetical expressions, you use commas. You'll see commas most of the time. Also, you can use dashes and you can use parentheses. So that's what you would use in parenthetical expressions, but most of the time you're going to see this. And look, they're considered non-essentials. Non-essentials mean it doesn't need to be in there. You're just putting it in there because you want to add it in there. They're not really a part of the sentence. Look at that. It's not really a part of the sentence to say Mother's Day was amazing. We just added it in. Interjections and parenthetical expressions, they're different. Make sure that you're understanding the difference between the two. Interjections, they're just being thrown in. They're just being thrown in to a sentence. Wow, great job. So just make sure you know what the difference is. We're not talking about participle phrases. They're completely different than an adjective clause. Clauses and phrases are completely different. Adjectives, remember, they describe nouns. You can have adjective clauses describe nouns. This whole entire clause will describe a noun. Adjective clauses, they are words that begin with that, when, where, why, which, whose, whom, who. Now remember, these are reflective clauses. These are reflective pronouns. When you start them, you're going to start a dependent clause. Most likely, they're going to be adjective clauses. They modify nouns and pronouns. But oftentimes, adjective clauses that begin with these relative pronouns are the subject. So sometimes they're the subject, sometimes they're not the subject. So just know that. When you're getting confused, what is that? We did a whole lesson over this, but I'm just throwing it in to help you remember. Non-essentials, if you're putting a sentence in that is a non-essential, it's an adjective clause that starts with which. Non-essential that starts with the word which. Remember, those take commas. Essentials, that start with the word that, they don't take commas. Which takes commas, that does not take commas. Now make sure you learn your comma rules. A lot of them are super easy to remember, but a lot of them can be really confusing, and so if you don't remember them, just look them up. Say, okay, is this a comma rule or is this not? So anyways, we'll see you in the next lesson. Bye everybody.
Thanks for watching. Stay tuned for the next lesson. Bye.